Alright. Let's go ahead and get into part 7, Samuel. 1 Samuel. Okay. Alright, let's start out with a quote and give us a little bit of context to what we're reading today. So this is another quote by St. Matthew, or transcribed by St. Matthew, spoken by Jesus. It says, "What is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" How recognizable is that, right? It's mentioned a few times in the gospel, confirming that yes, Jesus had spoken these words. But what is a man profited if she I'm reading he shall and making it she. That just goes to show you here. What is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Alright, so of course we ascribe a negative connotation with this line because it has to do with the fact of losing our soul, right? And nobody likes the sound of that, right? Yes, definitely has a negative connotation. And then it also discusses gaining the whole world, right? So having power and authority to do so, but therefore sacrificing your own soul. So that is a good question here. What is the real profit then? So speaking on power and rulership, we have Saul, and this is actually going to be the beginning of his downfall, right? The beginning of the process of Saul, in fact, losing his own soul and disconnecting from himself and disconnecting from righteousness, I should say. So we're going to learn about the turn of events that comes to this. But besides what's happening in Saul's internal, there's a lot of, I guess you can say, good going on between the Israelites and their enemies. The Israelites are, of course, very valiant in battle. They do have the Lord on their side. Whenever they undertake something, the Lord is with them. So let's go ahead and get into their journeys. We're going to discuss a little bit about Saul's son Jonathan, get some more insight into his perspective, and of course we're going to circle back to Samuel and Saul. At this time, Samuel is still alive, although he is old. He's still kicking, still prophesying, doing all the kind of overseeing work of ruling the Israelites. So it says here, "Now the Israelites were in distress that day, because Saul had bound the people under an oath, saying, 'Cursed be anyone who eats food before the evening comes, before I have avenged myself on my enemies.' So none of the troops tasted food." So here in this moment, it's Saul, the human, right, going ahead and binding people under oath. He is the king, or the elected ruler, right? He has some aura of kingship going on. He's guiding the people into war, so of course he's instructing these tight rules and restrictions on people. I just related to this line here because we are in Ramadan. We have been fasting for the majority of the day, sun up to sundown, and that's exactly what Saul is prescribing here. So we do know that there are spiritual benefits and there are righteous acts that can come from fasting. But of course Saul prescribes this under his king guise, his oath. It wasn't necessarily something that was demanded or commanded by the Lord. And I would say Ramadan is not either. I'm not really sure how that was founded, right? How that tradition began, if I can recall. But I do know there's purpose, right? There's purpose to fasting. there's purpose to spiritual cleansing. So it says here, Saul's son Jonathan says, "But Jonathan has not heard that his father had bound the people with the oath. So he reached out the end of his staff that was in his hand and dipped it into the honeycomb. He raised his hand to his mouth, and his eyes brightened." So Jonathan was unaware, seemingly unaware of the fact that this was going on, and they found some honeycomb, which he then tasted. So, long story short, somebody's told Jonathan that, "Hey, we weren't supposed to be eating today." And he's like, "I didn't know. Don't worry about it." That sort of attitude. It says here, so Saul asked God, "Shall I go down and pursue the Philistines? Will you give them into Israel's hand?" But God did not answer him that day. Okay, so immediately, Saul does have influence and connection with the Lord, communication with the Lord. And apparently God not answering him was a big deal to Saul. So he's immediately trying to wonder and figure out what he did wrong. And he does go to Jonathan and ask him, "What did you do?" Immediately goes to Jonathan. I think maybe some people had told him, "Oh, Jonathan ate the honey, what have you." But I didn't put this in here, but before this section, it actually talks about the Israelites going into battle. They had a they had a win, right? A victorious outcome. And they took the plunder, which consisted of rams, goats, sheep, cows, that sort of thing. And they actually slaughtered the meat and was eating the meat uncooked. So it still had blood in it and all that sort of thing. So the people had done this. The people had done that as well. I don't know, we don't know the mystery behind why God did not answer him, but maybe it was to spark some kind of question to Saul's judgment or rulership. But anyways, that wasn't necessarily a good thing that the people did, but they did it and kind of just swept it under the rug in their energy of winning, right? But Saul goes to Jonathan, as we discussed. Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." So Jonathan told him, "I tasted a little honey with the end of my staff, and now I must die." Because previously Saul was making a big deal out of the situation. He's like, even if it was my own son who went against my commands, anyone who did that will go ahead and be put to death. So he was really hell-bent on the fact that nobody was supposed to eat. That was his rule. He made the oath as king, and he's imposing himself a lot of power, right? He's giving himself a lot of power and a lot of control over these people. He's making kind of a big fuss about it. But anyways, the men had convinced Saul, or they said to Saul, "Should Jonathan die, he who has brought about this great deliverance in Israel? Never. As surely as the Lord lives, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground, for he did this today with God's help." So the men rescued Jonathan, and he was not put to death. So they're convincing Saul not to make this big deal. He didn't know, just leave him alone. And Jonathan was definitely a righteous person. He was a brave person, as we learned about in the last reading. So they're protecting him. And then the outcome of this was that Saul stopped pursuing the Philistines, and they withdrew to their own land. So just for this moment in time, eventually they go back to war, but just for this moment, Saul stops pursuing the Philistines. He didn't hear back from the Lord. He felt unrighteous under God's vision, so he went ahead, and since he didn't hear from the Lord, had withdrawn. It says here, after Saul had assumed rule over Israel, he fought against their enemies on every side: Moab, the Ammonites, Edom, the kings of Zobah, and the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he inflicted punishment on them. So it's saying here, after Saul had assumed rule, I mean, he's kind of been in leadership and rule for quite a while, but it does show very war-torn, his rulership, as we kind of predicted it would be. Then Saul attacked the Ammonites all the way from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt. Samuel said, okay, pause. We're just going to pause for a second. Again, war-torn, very, very heavy on the offense, right? The battles that are taking place. And then Samuel goes to Saul, and he kind of gives him a warning, right? He's saying that you are responsible for these people. Are you not responsible for these people? And I don't know, I'm forgetting, if you just allow me to recollect my brain, there must have been something that was going on up until this moment. Or if they just turned away. Oh, yes. Okay, so something here. I'm glad I checked. So the Lord actually commanded Saul to attack the Ammonites, and there was a condition, a special feature of this command was to destroy the Ammonites so entirely and so greatly that nothing in the city would last. So this to really purge of all sin in the area, I guess, or really to get rid of all sin. So the command was to purge all of the Ammonites, all of their animals, women, children, all of that stuff. But what the Israelites did not do under Saul's command is they actually kept the animals once again, and they ate them, or they used them as offerings. That's what Saul said. They said, oh, well, we took the plunder and we sacrificed it to the Lord to give thanks. But the Lord's command is very specific in that they should have just slaughtered everything and left it and not taken any plunder for themselves. So they didn't do that. And the Lord, that was kind of like the last straw on the camel's back. I don't really know what else was going on with Saul at this time other than the fact that he was very militarily driven. He was very just war, fight, attack. But this definitely was the last straw with God. He basically said, I regret. He talked to Samuel and he said, I regret making Saul the king. I had sadness about it. And some may say that, how could the Lord regret, right? How could the Lord make a mistake? He's not human. How can he experience these human emotions? You're right, in a sense. He's not human in the sense that, he should be all intertwined. But again, the Lord's role and the Lord's job is to look after his people, is to communicate with his people. So why put it past him that he can't experience some of the feelings and the sense of a feeling even that we can feel? So it does say in the text that the Lord did regret making Saul king. He was already, too, against giving Israel a king. He knew what would come out of it, but he did it anyway. So it was kind of that feeling behind it. Like, he just gave the Israelites what they wanted, and then he does come to find that it was a regrettable decision in his eyes. So he communicates with Samuel, and he says, you can tell Saul, but let him know that this is his last, this is his last chance to make things right, or, it's his last leg, right? It's his last opportunity as king, really. But, yes. So Samuel is talking now to Saul, and he says, although you were once small in your own eyes, did you not become the head over the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel. So he's giving him this little speech in this time. He's saying, you have such great responsibility. You're not taking this as seriously as you should be taking it. You're a little bit wanton in your decision making and your characteristics. And it's this thing of responsibility, right? Like a king is a king, And we were kind of comparing Saul to the judges of the past in the book of Judges, right? They really didn't seem like there was any stark difference, besides maybe the way that the things were structured, and there was more custom, I guess, in being a king versus just a ruler or a judge. But again, his behavior just wasn't all that. Let's just put it that way. So Samuel, of course, is lecturing him, and Saul is feeling terrible. And as Samuel turned to leave, Saul caught a hold of the hem of his robe and tore it. And then for that was the last straw for Samuel. Samuel said to him, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, and has given it to one of your neighbors, to one better than you." So here we go. We have Samuel relaying really just God's prophecy to him, and then relaying it to Saul, saying that he's going to be replaced. So from that moment on, as harsh as that may sound, from that moment on, it does plant a seed inside Saul that actually does not produce any good fruit. He's very tormented after this, very on edge and suspicious, and the word that I'm looking for is paranoid. Paranoid. And he embodies the nature of really just like a paranoid king, that everybody's going to come after me and kill me, or somebody's going to replace me. So in order to compensate for that, he starts to lash out, and he starts to be aggressive in nature, even more aggressive than he already has been, right? Because we come to know that Saul is just a guy, right? Just an aggressive man. Can't put it any other way. I'm sorry with my colloquialisms, guys. Trying to paint you the picture, so I'm pretty sure you get it. Anywho, I'm looking just at the complete wrong page. Anyways, that's really all I have to say, right? So this is the beginning of Saul's downfall. We have Jonathan, his son, who seems to be a nice, sweet person, right? We talked a little bit about Jonathan, who will appear maybe a little bit later. And Saul, on the other hand, the powers just get into his head, and then it was revoked from him, and he's feeling all, ashamed and things like that. It is a little strict, because it's kind of like, they kind of left out, a little part of God's command, but the Lord is like, no, this is not how this works. Like, I granted you this responsibility and this kingship, and you cannot, misconstrue it. You cannot even mess up one little piece, because, I really should just be the ruler and the king of you guys. But if you're going to rule in physicality in place of me, you need to do everything correct and to a T. So really, the Lord here is setting that standard. He's setting this, like, level command. Do as I say, not as what I don't say. Yeah, you guys, starting to get a little crazy. I have errands to run this morning somehow before work, so let's see if I can get that complete. I appreciate you listening. I hope you have a great rest of your week and day, and I'll catch you guys another time. Bye-bye.